She promised her mother to buy a car when they had nothing to eat. The mother worked as a maid for 50 years. The daughter studied nights, scrubbed floors during the day, and lived in the attic. The neighbors laughed. "What kind of doctor are you?" And then she came back, in a white coat, keys in her hand. "Subscribe so you don't miss it. Tell me in the comments what they didn't believe about you." The faucet in the kitchen dripped in a slow, irregular rhythm, each drop echoing through the small apartment like a metronome for a life that moved quietly, carefully, and always just one step ahead of collapse. Outside the single window of the attic room, dawn crept reluctantly into the sky, the first smudges of light barely touching the rooftops of the Southside neighborhood. The air smelled of old wood and starch, with a hint of last night's fried bread still lingering in the cracks of the floorboards. Mary James, 70 years old, stood in the cramped kitchen with her back straight and her movements precise. She wore a faded blue housecoat over her nightgown, the fabric worn thin at the elbows, and her feet were tucked into orthopedic slippers she had stitched herself with dental floss years ago. A pot of weak coffee simmered on the stove, the same enamel pot she had carried with her from her mother's house in Mississippi over 4 decades earlier. She opened the drawer with the deliberate slowness of someone who knew every creak it would make and didn't want to wake her daughter. The spoon rattled lightly against the chipped ceramic cup as she stirred in a spoonful of powdered creamer. It wasn't good coffee, but it was hot, and that mattered. Mary's eyes flicked toward the narrow staircase leading to the attic. That room, barely tall enough to stand in without hitting your head on the beams, was where her daughter, Shyla, studied, slept, and dreamed. Shyla was 30 now, thin from skipping meals, dark-eyed from long nights, with a fire in her that hadn't gone out even when it should have. Even when the world had poured bucket after bucket of cold water over her head, telling her to stop, to settle, to accept. She never did. Mary sat at the tiny kitchen table and pulled out the iron from beneath it. She plugged it into the socket above the sink and laid out her uniform on the board. Plain khaki slacks, a white shirt with creases already sharp, and a name tag that read Mary Housekeeping. No title, no last name, no identity beyond the job. 52 years of cleaning other people's houses, of scrubbing porcelain tubs with bleach until her knuckles bled, of smiling politely at wealthy women who called her the help without even meaning to be cruel. They didn't need to. The structure did it for them. And now she was still doing it. 70 years old, still working, still cleaning up after strangers, but she never complained, not once. She turned her face toward the warm light spilling through the window and allowed herself one quiet breath. She had promised herself a long time ago that she wouldn't cry in the mornings. The attic stairs creaked, then a footstep, then another. Shyla appeared, barefoot and bleary-eyed, a hoodie zipped halfway up over a wrinkled t-shirt, and a thick stack of medical textbooks pressed tightly against her chest like armor. "Morning," Mary said, not turning. "Morning, Mama," Shyla replied, her voice still hoarse with sleep. She walked past her mother and poured herself the remaining half cup of coffee. No cream, no sugar, just bitter fuel. "You didn't sleep, did you?" Mary asked. "Didn't have time." Shyla dropped her books on the counter and rubbed her eyes with the back of her hand. "Pharmacology's a beast. You ever try memorizing 200 drug interactions in one night?" Mary chuckled, finally turning. "No, but I've memorized 200 ways to get blood out of bed sheets, so I figure that counts for something." Shyla smiled, a rare, soft smile. They didn't joke often, but when they did, it came like sunlight through storm clouds. Mary reached out and brushed her daughter's hair behind her ear. "I made toast last night. It's cold, but it's something. I'm good. I've got granola in my bag." They both knew she didn't, but Mary didn't argue. Shyla's pride was as sacred as a prayer. Outside, the sounds of buses gearing up filled the air. Mary moved quietly through her morning routine, dressing, tying her shoes, folding a towel into her bag in case she was asked to polish any floors by hand that day. She didn't trust gloves, said she needed to feel the dirt to kill it. Shyla sat on the kitchen stool, trying to stay upright. Her eyes fluttered, blinking back exhaustion, while her fingers ran unconsciously across a page in her open textbook. "When you become a doctor," Mary said casually, adjusting the collar of her shirt in the mirror above the sink, "you better not forget how to make good toast." Shyla looked up. "When, huh?" Mary met her eyes in the mirror. "I said what I said." There was silence between them for a long beat. Then came the flash of memory, warm, golden, fragile. Shyla had been 10, sitting on the stoop with her knees scraped and her cheeks sticky from a popsicle. She had looked up at her mother, who was ironing her uniform inside the kitchen, and said with the unshakable certainty of childhood, "I'm going to buy you a car one day, a white one, so you never have to take that smelly bus again." Mary had smiled, not mocking, just tired. "That right?" "Yep," Shyla said, "and I'm going to be a doctor, so you don't never have to clean toilets no more." They had laughed, and then Mary had gone back to her ironing, but she remembered that moment every day since. Back in the present, Mary picked up her bag. "I'll be back by 7. Don't wait up." Shyla stood and kissed her mother's cheek. "Be safe." Mary paused at the door. "You still applying to that summer course?" "They need the application fee by Friday," Shyla muttered. Mary nodded. "There's 20 in the jar." "That's not enough." "Don't worry about it." Shyla didn't argue. She never did when her mother used that tone. It was the tone of someone who had made something out of nothing her entire life. After Mary left, Shyla sat in the silence of the kitchen, listening to the distant sirens and barking dogs. The walls trembled slightly when the upstairs neighbors walked too hard, and the whole place smelled faintly of bleach and lemon-scented polish. She picked up her books and trudged back upstairs to the attic room. The ceiling angled sharply, and her mattress lay on the floor beside a milk crate stacked with notebooks. A single bulb hung from the ceiling like a weary eye, flickering when it rained. But here, in this space, she had dreams. She had plans. She sat cross-legged on the mattress and opened a fresh notebook. The first page read, "Dr. Shyla James, Internal Medicine." The handwriting was careful, almost reverent. She began to copy a chart on antibiotics when she heard laughter outside the window. The neighborhood kids were playing with sticks, pretending they were swords or guns. One of them yelled, "Hey, isn't that the girl whose mama scrubs toilets?" Another shouted, "Yeah, and she thinks she gonna be a doctor." The laughter was mean and sharp and stupid, but it still sliced through her. Shyla stared at the page, her pen trembling in her hand. Her eyes burned, but she refused to cry. She would not cry for ignorance. She would not cry because she was poor. She would not cry because she was tired or hungry or alone. She would study. She would survive, and one day she would buy her mother that car. At night, when the sounds of the city finally died down and her mother snored softly below, Shyla lay awake under a threadbare blanket. She stared at the ceiling and whispered the words like a prayer. "I'm going to make it. I have to." The wind rattled the window, and the light from the street lamp carved shadows across her face, but her eyes were wide open, and her soul was on fire. And so the girl in the attic kept studying while the world slept, kept dreaming while the world doubted, kept rising while the world pressed her down. Because some promises, once made, are written in blood and memory and bone. And Shyla James had made hers in the glow of a kitchen light, with a tired mother, a crust of toast, and a heart full of fire. The hallway lights in St. Clair Memorial buzzed faintly, a high-pitched hum that never quite left Shyla's ears. It was 3:42 a.m., and the linoleum floors glistened with disinfectant under the flicker of fluorescent panels. She had just finished mopping the ICU entrance for the second time after a vomiting patient had stumbled through earlier. Her hands ached, her back screamed, but she gritted her teeth and pushed the cleaning cart forward. She'd been on her feet for 10 hours. "Hey, sweetheart," a voice called from behind. It was Nurse Delaney, broad-shouldered, middle-aged, and as dismissive as she was efficient. "You missed a spot by bed 4. Try not to leave puddles this time, 'kay?" Shyla didn't answer, just nodded, turned her cart, and walked back toward the room in question. Bed 4 housed an elderly man in restraints, his head tilted sideways, eyes half-lidded under sedation. The sharp antiseptic scent mingled with the metallic tang of blood. Shyla bent over and wiped the floor, carefully sliding the mop beneath the IV stands. "You're not going to get very far wiping floors," another nurse murmured as she passed, "unless that's what your degree's in." Shyla didn't look up, didn't respond. She had learned that silence was the best armor. Words wasted energy. Words could slip and betray the exhaustion she carried like a second skin. She finished her shift at 6 a.m., changed into her only pair of clean jeans in the employee locker room, and took the long bus ride across town to the community college. Her head bobbed with sleep against the window, her bag of books clutched in her lap like a child. It was a cold March morning. The wind knifed through her hoodie as she hurried up the campus steps. Her first class was pharmacology, and she was already 10 minutes late. She slipped into the back row as the professor, Dr. Green, a tall, impatient man with a trimmed beard and a habit of calling out "pop quiz" without warning, droned on about calcium channel blockers. Shyla opened her notebook trying to focus, but the words swam. Her vision blurred. Her hands trembled. She hadn't eaten anything since noon the day before. From the front of the room, a hand shot up. Blonde hair, French manicure, the kind of girl who wore matching binder sets and drove a Civic with leather seats. "Dr. Green," the girl asked, "can you repeat the interaction between amlodipine and grapefruit juice?" Shyla knew the answer, knew it instinctively. She had read it twice last night while waiting for laundry, but her tongue refused to move. Her body was in class, but her mind was collapsing. "Grapefruit inhibits CYP3A4, the professor answered, "which increases plasma levels of amlodipine. So, what does that mean?" "Stronger side effects," someone mumbled. "Correct. Good." Shyla scribbled it down, even though she already had it written 3 pages earlier. Her handwriting was crooked this time. Her vision dimmed again. She shook her head to stay awake. When class ended, she stumbled outside into the wind. The next class was anatomy. After that, biology. Then lab. Then a short shift in the hospital cafeteria washing trays for 4 hours. Then maybe she'd sleep. 2 hours. 3 if she skipped dinner. By the time she returned home that night, the street lamps had blinked on, casting golden pools of light across the cracked sidewalks. She climbed the narrow stairs, unlocked the door, and found her mother sitting on the couch, mending an old pair of her socks. "Mama," Shyla said weakly, you don't have to do that." "I like keeping busy," Mary replied, squinting through her glasses. "Besides, ain't no harm in saving $7. I can buy socks." Mary looked at her daughter, then at the bags under her eyes, the pale color of her lips, the slight limp in her walk. She said nothing, just quietly folded the sock and stood. "You eatin' today?" "I had some coffee." "That's not food," Shyla sighed. "I had some crackers in the cafeteria." Mary went to the stove and stirred the pot. She'd made cabbage soup with the last of the onions and 2 small potatoes. She ladled it into a chipped bowl and slid it in front of her daughter. Shyla hesitated. "You gotta stop skipping meals," Mary said gently. "No use being a doctor if you're dead first." Shyla took a spoonful. It was barely seasoned, but warm. "I failed a quiz today," she muttered. Mary sat across from her. "That don't mean a damn thing." "It does. I can't afford to fail. If I lose the program—" "You won't. You're too stubborn." Shyla looked up, her eyes shining. "They don't want me there, Mama." Mary didn't flinch. "Then make them regret it." The next morning, Shyla woke to a $20 bill slipped beneath her pillow. She knew what it meant. She also knew her mother had no extra money, that she must have skipped buying her own medication or groceries just to give her daughter enough for a tutoring session. That week, Shyla used the money to attend a peer study group. For the first time, someone explained the drug classes in a way that made sense. She realized she'd been studying wrong, not less, but less efficiently. She changed her approach, created flashcards, taped charts to the wall above her mattress, spoke terms aloud while brushing her teeth. Her scores improved. She started passing her quizzes, then acing them. Her name began to appear in the top 10% of the class. She still worked nights, still cleaned up vomit and blood. But now, when a nurse barked an order, she responded with calm certainty, her back straighter, her voice clearer. When a doctor made a rude comment, she let it slide off her like rain on a tarp. She was building something under the surface. By mid-spring, she was called into the office of the academic dean. "You're balancing full-time studies and 2 jobs?" the woman asked, eyebrows raised. "Yes, ma'am." "And still maintaining a 3.9 GPA?" "Yes, ma'am." The dean leaned back. "We'd like to offer you a small merit scholarship. It doesn't cover everything, but it helps." Shyla blinked. "Thank you." She went home and gave the check to her mother. "No," Mary said firmly, "you cash that for you. But rent, we'll manage. We always have." They hugged tightly. Neither spoke for a long while. On the evening of her final spring exam, Shyla left the hospital early. The sky was pink and gold, the city breathing slower for once. She got off the bus a few stops early and walked the rest of the way home, watching as the neighborhood kids played tag with bare feet and wild shrieks. One little girl, maybe 7, pointed at her and whispered to a friend, "That's the doctor girl. Her mama cleans houses." The other child laughed. "Doctors don't live here?" Shyla kept walking. The insult didn't sting this time. Not because it wasn't meant to, but because Shyla knew it wasn't true. She would be a doctor. Not just for her, not just for the kids who laughed or the professors who doubted, but for her mother. For the woman who gave her $20 bills she didn't have. Who made soup out of scraps. Who ironed her uniforms in silence and kissed her forehead when no one else did. That night, Shyla sat at her attic desk and began filling out her medical school application. The wind rattled the window panes. Her stomach rumbled. Her hands trembled. But her mind was steady. "I'm not just gonna survive," she whispered to herself. "I'm gonna rise." She smiled as she wrote, and in the kitchen below, Mary hummed a gospel song while folding clothes, unaware that her daughter had just crossed another invisible line, one of 1,000, that led toward the life she had once dared only to imagine. The rain came down hard that morning, a steady percussion against the attic window as Shyla stirred awake. She had slept for barely 3 hours, her dreams fragmented and gray, haunted by shifting equations and anatomy diagrams that blinked away the moment she opened her eyes. Her blanket had slipped to the floor in the night, and her legs were cold. She pulled on a pair of socks, mended twice at the toes, and reached for the tattered white coat draped over the back of the chair. It wasn't real, not yet, just part of her training uniform, but whenever she wore it, something stirred in her chest, a whisper of who she would become. She traced the blank space above the left breast pocket with her finger and imagined the embroidery. Dr. Shyla James. Downstairs, she heard the kettle hiss and the cupboard open. Her mother always moved slowly these days, carefully, deliberately, as though afraid any sudden motion might betray a weakness she refused to name. Shyla padded down the narrow stairs, the wood creaking beneath her feet. In the kitchen, Mary stood in her robe, stirring oatmeal with a wooden spoon. The scent of cinnamon lingered in the air. "You're up early," Mary said without turning. "Again. I've got clinicals. You have them every day." Shyla smiled softly and pulled her coat tighter. "That's how you learn." Mary handed her a bowl, her hands shaken ever so slightly. Shyla noticed it. She'd noticed it for weeks now, the cough that wouldn't go away, the pallor in her mother's cheeks, the way she gripped the counter for balance when she thought no one was looking. "You all right?" Shyla asked. Mary waved her off. "It's just the weather, makes the bones ache." Shyla didn't press. Not yet. She finished her oatmeal quickly, kissed her mother's forehead, and ran through the rain toward the bus stop. Her umbrella had broken 2 weeks earlier, and she hadn't found the money to replace it. The ride to the hospital took 40 minutes. She used the time to review flashcards, mouthing terms under her breath, her reflection in the fogged-up window, a tired blur of focus and fear. At the hospital, she changed into scrubs and met her preceptor on the 3rd floor. Dr. Klein was brisk and sharp, his voice clipped, his patience thinner than a scalpel's edge. He barely looked at her when he spoke, and when he did, it was usually to point out what she hadn't done or should have known already. They moved through rooms one by one. A stroke patient in 302, a young man with endocarditis in 307, an elderly woman with metastatic breast cancer in 310. Shyla listened, asked questions when allowed, took careful notes. She drew blood, read vitals, and changed linens when the nurses were too busy. At noon, Dr. Klein dismissed her abruptly. "You'll need to speed up if you want to survive rotations." She nodded, biting back the urge to retort. He didn't mean it cruelly. He just didn't believe she would last. Most didn't. After clinicals, she headed to the student library to study before night shift. She sat at the far corner, headphones in, blocking out the world. Her notes were detailed, her mind sharp, until she glanced down and saw the page spinning. She blinked hard. Her vision didn't clear. Shyla closed the book and leaned back in the chair, pressing her palms to her eyes. Her chest felt tight. Her temples throbbed. She hadn't eaten since breakfast. Again. She reached into her backpack and pulled out a granola bar, stale, crushed but edible. She ate it slowly, then leaned over her notebook, willing herself to keep going. Just 2 more hours. Then work. Then she could sleep. Maybe. Back home, Mary sat alone in the dim kitchen, the radio playing old jazz at low volume. She had tried to do laundry earlier but found herself breathless after just a single trip up the stairs. Her fingers tingled. Her lips had turned a shade too close to gray. But she had sat, drank water, and waited for the shaking to pass. She hadn't told Shyla. Couldn't. Not when her daughter was climbing an impossible mountain for both of them. At work that night, Shyla found herself elbow-deep in soapy water, scrubbing cafeteria trays alongside teenage workers and part-time staff. Her scrubs were damp at the hems. Her hands stung from a cut she hadn't noticed until the soap hit it. "Why are you even here?" a new girl asked beside her, chewing gum as she stacked trays. "Aren't you in, medical school or something?" "Still got bills," Shyla said. The girl shrugged. "I'd just quit. School's hard enough without working." Shyla didn't answer. She knew the girl meant no harm. She just didn't know what it meant to have no choice. After her shift, Shyla took the late bus home. The driver knew her by now, nodded without a word. Outside the windows, the city pulsed with neon signs and silence, the kind of hush that only came after midnight. She reached their door just after 1. The lights were off. Mary was asleep. The next morning, she found her mother in the bathroom, clutching the sink with white knuckles, her breath ragged, sweat beading her forehead. "Mama," Mary tried to wave her away. "I'm fine." "You're not." Shyla guided her gently to the couch. Her own hands trembled as she called for an ambulance. The ER was cold and sterile. Mary lay on a gurney, IV in her arm, monitors beeping steadily beside her. A young doctor approached with a clipboard. "Your mother's blood pressure was dangerously high. She's also showing signs of advanced diabetes. There may be early kidney involvement." Shyla swallowed hard. "She never told me. Many patients don't." They admitted Mary for overnight observation. Shyla stayed by her side, her books unopened, her phone unanswered. Her mother slept fitfully, murmuring half-formed thoughts in her sleep. When dawn broke, Shyla went to the hospital pharmacy and asked for the medication list. "We don't accept your plan," the pharmacist said flatly. "She's not covered here." Shyla nodded once, quietly. She left the hospital and walked 4 blocks in the cold to the nearest ATM. She withdrew every cent in her account. That night, she didn't eat. She didn't study. She watched her mother sleep and held her hand. When Mary woke, her voice was hoarse. "You need to go home, baby." "No, you've got class. You're more important." Mary turned her head. "You're my legacy. You're my tomorrow." Shyla didn't cry, but something broke open in her that night, a vow deeper than before, more sacred. The next day, she walked into her program director's office and applied for additional clinical hours. She requested the night shift in emergency care. It paid more. "I'll have no life," she told herself, "but Mama will have her medicine." Weeks passed. She juggled 3 shifts, 6 classes, and 1 human life, her mother's, without dropping anything. Her professors noticed. So did a patient. An elderly woman, recovering from pneumonia, watched as Shyla adjusted her oxygen levels one morning. The woman touched her wrist. "You have hands like a healer," she whispered. Shyla smiled faintly. "I'm trying to be." "Don't try," the woman said, "just be." When graduation approached, the faculty gathered names for the honors board. Shyla's name appeared among the top 5%. At home, she didn't say a word. She picked up an envelope that had arrived in the mail. A letter from a hospital residency program. She opened it carefully. Accepted. The first words she read, "Dear Miss James." We are pleased to offer you a residency position in internal medicine." She looked across the room. Mary sat at the table, peeling sweet potatoes slowly, humming an old hymn. Shyla walked over and pressed the letter into her mother's hands. Mary read it, then looked up. Her eyes were wet. "You did it," she whispered. Shyla nodded. "We did." That night, they sat on the stoop with 2 plastic cups of ginger ale and watched the city lights twinkle. It was quiet. Shyla leaned against her mother's shoulder. "We're almost there, Mama." Mary kissed the crown of her daughter's head. "I always knew you would be." The morning sun crept slowly across the kitchen floor, catching on the worn tiles and scattering light on the faded wallpaper that had held its place for 30 years. The kitchen smelled of warm, buttered toast and quiet pride. Mary sat at the table, wrapping a scarf around her shoulders, her breath slow but steady, her skin clearer now that the medication had stabilized her blood pressure. Her movements were slower, but her eyes, still sharp, followed the curve of her daughter's steps. Shyla stood by the sink, dressed in her white coat. Not a student coat, not an intern badge, but a proper residence coat. It carried weight now. Weight she had earned. "Mama," she said, turning toward the table, "I've got 3 consults this afternoon, then clinic hours till 7. You want me to pick up anything on the way back?" Mary sipped her tea. "No, baby, we're stocked fine. Got beans and rice, and I'm thinking about making cornbread later. Don't wear yourself out." "Don't worry, I pace myself now, learned from the best." They smiled. The silence between them was soft now, not heavy. It had been 6 months since Shyla had started her residency. 6 months of real paychecks, of covered insurance, of no more choosing between textbooks and groceries. She had paid off the debt collectors who still called their number even after she changed phones. She had replaced the broken heater. She had bought her mother a proper set of glasses with the correct prescription. But she had kept one secret. Every Friday since the start of her new job, she had been walking 4 blocks past the hospital, slipping into a used car lot tucked between a payday loan office and a shuttered laundromat. She'd sit down with Curtis, the owner, and go over payments. No financing, no debt, all cash. It took 5 months of budgeting, cutting corners, turning down outings with colleagues, and eating peanut butter sandwiches when necessary. But she had done it. And now the car sat outside, just down the street, polished and gleaming in the late morning sun. A 2009 white Toyota Corolla. No dents, no rust, decent mileage, paid in full, with a bright red bow tied to the antenna. The keys burned in her pocket. She took the rest of the day off. She'd arranged it weeks in advance, and waited until Mary finished folding the laundry before speaking. "Hey, Mama." "Let's go out." Mary looked at her sideways. "Out? You got the day off?" Shyla nodded. "Yeah, figured we could take a little walk." Mary wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders and stood slowly. "All right, but you better not drag me too far. These knees don't march like they used to." Shyla guided her gently down the steps of the apartment building. The air was cool but not cold, and the wind carried the faint smell of fried food from the corner store. The streets were familiar. The cracks in the sidewalk, the neighbor's chipped fence, the telephone wires overhead, all part of a map they had walked 1,000 times together. But this time, something was different. Mary paused as they turned the corner. There, parked at the curb, sat the car. White, clean, humble, and beautiful. A thick, shimmering red bow sat on the hood, tied with perfect symmetry. Mary stared at it, then at Shyla. "What is that?" Shyla reached into her coat pocket and pulled out the keys. It's yours. Mary blinked. Mine? Shyla stepped closer, gently pressing the keys into her mother's palm. I promised you, remember? I said I'd buy you a car so you'd never have to ride the bus again. Mary looked down at the keys, then up at the car again. Her hand trembled. You remembered that? Every single day. Mary's lips parted, but no words came. Her eyes were wide, and tears shimmered, catching the sunlight. You worked too hard, she finally whispered. I worked just hard enough, Shyla replied. They stood there for a long moment. The city bustled around them. Cars passed, kids yelled in the distance, music thumped from a window somewhere, but none of it reached them. The world had quieted. Mary stepped toward the car, her fingers brushing the handle. I don't know how to drive anymore, she said softly, almost embarrassed. I'll teach you, Shyla replied. Mary turned back to her daughter and pulled her into a long, tight hug. You did it, she whispered. Shyla hugged her back. We did. That afternoon they went for a drive. Shyla took the wheel first, Mary in the passenger seat, seatbelt strapped tight, hands clasped in her lap. They drove through the neighborhood, then onto the outer streets of the city. They passed the hospital. They passed the college campus. They passed the house Mary had once cleaned for a family who never remembered her name. Mary watched the world from the window, her reflection shimmering in the glass, her face relaxed in a way it hadn't been in years. Is it okay? She asked quietly, to feel like I've arrived at something. Shyla reached over and squeezed her hand. It's more than okay. Later, they parked the car at the top of the hill near the reservoir. The sun was dipping low, throwing orange and pink across the sky. The lake below shimmered with light. The city stretched far in the distance, small and endless all at once. They sat in silence. I remember when I brought you home from the hospital, Mary said. Walked 4 blocks in the snow 'cause the cab wouldn't come to our street. Held you so tight, like you were glass. I looked at your little face and said, you gonna go farther than me. You gonna be more than I ever had the right to ask for. Shyla blinked against the sting in her eyes. Mary smiled softly. You went farther than I ever dreamed. You were the dream, Shyla said. I just followed it. The wind picked up. A soft breeze moved through the trees. In the distance, the first street lamps began to flicker on. They drove home slowly, savoring the quiet. The ride wasn't long, but it felt eternal. Back at the apartment, Shyla walked her mother upstairs, tucked her in for the night, and sat by her bed just for a moment, watching her breathe. This was what it meant to come full circle. She stood, turned out the light, and walked to the attic. She sat at her desk and opened a fresh page in her journal. At the top, she wrote, For Mama. You are the reason I can stand. You are the reason I soar. Outside, the white Toyota gleamed under the street lamp. The red bow flapped gently in the breeze. And in the house above, 2 women rested, one who had cleaned the world's floors, and one who now walked its halls in white, with a stethoscope and a heart shaped by love. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next story. Watch the other videos. Each one tells something powerful. And if this one stayed with you, share it.